And we're live. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. It is Bob Cooney coming to you live from Melbourne once again, still, and with a special edition of the Being Virtual show. I know we said we're going to take a time out, but there's only one person that I would get up to do a show at 6 a.m. here in Melbourne for, and another who will bring it back from the dead because I'm here with the inimitable Randy White. Can we get some applause?
Yay!
Yay! Hey, Randy, thanks for joining us. I meant on the little applause button, but how you doing?
Bob. I'm doing great. How are you on the other side of the world? What's the temperature down there?
It's cold as hell. It's or wherever the other place where it's cold is. Cold and windy and rainy, and but that's okay. There's very few cases of coronavirus, so I guess that's the trade-off.
Well, that means everybody's staying inside, I hope.
Yeah, look, the Australians have done a great job. Australia and New Zealand have done a remarkable job of managing it and communicating with people so they would follow the rules. Like there wasn't a lot of confusing. Man, we were talking about that. Coming into the show about how much mixed messaging confuses people and then nobody knows what to do. So
just the opposite of what's happened here in the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody, we will be taking your questions live. I'm watching on the chat. Make sure you drop whatever platform you're in, especially let us know if you're watching on LinkedIn Live. This is our first live stream to LinkedIn. Thank you to Howard McAuliffe. And Howard's wife, who I don't even know her name. I'm a little embarrassed, but thank you for getting us hooked up. So drop the messages in the chat. If you're on my Facebook group, make sure you put your name in the message so I know who you are, because that still doesn't come through. So Randy, we've known each other for, I want to say 20 years or more.
I would say so, yes, several decades.
And you were in the business. You were an expert when I got into the business. How long have you been doing this?
I think it's something like 31 years now.
Wow. And so you've seen a lot, right? You've seen peaks and valleys and recessions and booms and busts and so we're going to talk about what you're seeing now in the data. And one of the things I love that you do is you bring data. Like I just spew shit and opinions and intuition. And then and where I have data, and a lot of the data that I get is from you. And I want to thank you for the work that you do. Let's just jump into it. Let's get to, you by the way, follow Randy at White Hutchinson on Twitter, because that seems to be your social media network
LinkedIn.
Of choice.
LinkedIn.
And LinkedIn.
Yeah, you can sign up for my blogs and the newsletters.
WhiteHutchinson.com, and all of that will be in the comments and the notes with links. And if you get my email, I did send you all an email to Randy's blog and to a link to Randy's blog and Twitter feed as well. So go check out the email. It'll be in there as well. Now, one of the things that you've recently created a graph about is what are people willing to do or not willing to do, compared to what they were willing to do before. So after COVID, before COVID,
right?
And we're gonna put up a graph up on the screen to show this, and so 70% were willing to go to work, 29% not willing to go to work, which I think is interesting. And do you think that's tied to the 30 some odd percent of the jobs they say that are able to be done from home?
I would think that would be a factor. But I think most people feel much safer in a very controlled environment.
Interesting. And if you get to the other end of that spectrum, there's sporting events, which only 19% of the people are saying they're willing to go, and 81 are saying no.
Right.
Is there a timeline with this graph? I know you have another one where you looked at like 1 month, 3 months, whatever.
Well, Bob, we've been accessing polling data from about 14 different sources on this. And what we're seeing is presently you have about 20 to 25% of people say within the next month or so they're willing to go to a lot of these location-based entertainment things, stadiums much less, movie theaters much less. Then you have another group saying, well, we want to see how things go. Does the curve get flattened? How are the venues practicing safety protocols and cleaning? And that's a big chunk. Then we got a chunk that say, there's no way we're going back until there's a vaccine. And that's close to, it varies between a quarter and half the people. And then there's a very small percentage, single digit, that say they're permanently afraid of going to public places anymore. Even if COVID's gone, it's just they've become OCD.
Yeah, interesting. And one of the questions I've had is when you see these surveys, and I actually think you've addressed it in this one, when they say 30% of the people aren't willing to do this, or 20% of the people aren't willing to do that. Are those the people that weren't doing it in the first place, or are those the people that were doing it who are now saying, I'm done with that activity? Like, so for let's take trampoline parks for an example, right? Yeah. So because I see trampoline parks similar to sporting events at a large stadium, right? There's hundreds and hundreds of kids all in the same space together, bouncing, sweating, screaming, yelling, right? Does that mean that 25 to 50% of the people that were going to trampoline parks are saying, I'm done?
A lot of these surveys are only looking at people that previously did the activity. Now, some of them are looking across the whole population.
Yeah.
But we're seeing more or less consistency across all the surveys. The percentages vary some, but it's not to any great magnitude depending what question they ask.
And so this particular one had, you've got restaurants on the segment where people, and you've written a lot about this, people are willing to go back to restaurants more than almost any other leisure activity. What do you think behind that?
They're missing that more than anything. It was so much a part of their routine. Think about it. The average American got food from a restaurant 200 times a year.
Wow.
So we're trying to get back to normal. In terms of entertainment, going out to entertainment, the average American only goes out 12, 15 times a year. So it's not as much ingrained into our routine and our normalcy.
Yeah.
But, and you can get food delivered at home, but it's not the same experience. What people are really craving today is socialization. When we really dig into all the research, just not the current research, but previously before COVID, what we found is socialization is the primary motivator why they go to restaurants or entertainment venues. What happens is the food, the beverage, or whatever the activity is, facilitates the socialization. I've traveled around the world. I've worked in, I think, 37 countries, and there's one commonality to humans. We can't socialize unless we have some sort of drink in our hand. In the West, it's alcohol. In the Middle East, it's tea,
coffee.
Okay, or maybe coffee. We're eating something, or we're rowing or throwing a ball, or maybe we're throwing an axe now or a dart.
Yeah.
There's just something about that is part of us. It's hardwired into us. So what people are really craving is socialization, and restaurants provide that. They really provide it. In fact, a lot of the younger adults now consider going to a restaurant better entertainment than going to an entertainment venue.
Yeah.
Because we're all into the discovery and adventure with food and blogging about the food and posting it, So I think that's why restaurants are going to recover the fastest.
Yeah.
They also have an advantage. They can deliver too.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can't deliver a trampoline park, to a person's home.
Yeah.
We can deliver food.
So let's talk about that for a second. Chuck E. Cheese was outed on Reddit about delivering pizza and wings to the home under a pseudonym.
I think they're smart as hell. They really are. They ran a ghost kitchen. Hey, what's wrong with that? I don't think people would buy that.
So let me take a stab at that. Authenticity, right? So we know that millennials, especially, and Gen Zs, younger generations, are all about authenticity in marketing. And that's the polar opposite of authenticity. And
Absolutely.
So how is that going to play out for them and their brand as they try to come back?
Well, I think they have a problem now because they've been outed.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people know about it. But my understanding is it was a premium product. It wasn't the standard, pizza they serve at Chuck E. Cheese.
Okay.
And you go to a lot, Grubhub and all, you don't know where these restaurants are. I mean, we have ghost restaurants popping up all over the place now. They're nothing but kitchens, no seating, no carry out, no nothing, delivering food everywhere.
Wow, I didn't even realize that was a trend.
Oh,
I'm surprised Chuck E. Cheese. I'm surprised that didn't get more media attention. I guess the media is busy with other more pressing issues
yes,
right now.
yes. But they
So
were smart. It's helping them survive.
yeah, yeah. Now you sent me a preview of a blog, which I'm not sure if it's gone out yet, about the economic realities of businesses being able to come back, and based on capacity utilization.
Right.
Do you want to
Yes.
talk about some of your findings there?
Yeah, the blog is now posting on our website. It did go out this morning in the U.S., which you were probably sound asleep when it went out. But the bottom line is, at least in most of the U.S., the government is putting restrictions on what capacity you can have in your venue. And the purpose is for social distancing. For restaurants, the tables have to be so far apart. You can't have capacity greater. And I use the example of 50%, which seems to be kind of the standard right now. Well, the problem is I'm going to use the term LBE, location-based entertainment venues. Most of them can't economically survive at 50% of the revenues, because if you only can put 50% of the people in that you had before, and most people show up at peak times,
Yeah.
you're only going to get 50% of the revenue. I did an analysis of Dave & Buster's, which is a publicly traded company, dig all their access. I calculated that they needed 70% of revenues to break even cash-wise to pay their bills. It was surprising. Chuck E. Cheese was 97%.
Because they're so highly leveraged with debt, right?
They're highly leveraged and they're suffering some too.
Yeah.
But so the bottom line is, most of these venues that open now, because of the capacity restriction, aren't going to be profitable. And it's not going to be till the capacity restrictions are lifted. And then on top of that, we get a large enough percentage of the population willing to come back. So, I mean, it's unfortunate. We're going to see a lot of closures. We're going to see a lot that just don't open because they haven't been able to pay the bills while they've been locked down. And then we're going to have ones that open and they're not going to be making enough profit and they're going to close.
Yeah.
It's probably the major chains that are going to survive because they probably have better access to capital or selling stock than some of the independents.
Yeah. So we got a question from via Twitch from R. James B. asking about a little bit of the story of Chuck E. Cheese and why are they so highly leveraged? Like what happened there?
They were bought out by one of these Wall Street firms, and that's just standard operating procedure. Let's use other people's money.
Yeah.
And I think this is a good lesson right now for the industry because I've had too many clients that wanted to go borrow 90% of the money. And I always tell my clients, I would never go more than 60%. These bad times happen. And if you're over leveraged, you're not going to make it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and to that end, I know I was speaking to a vendor recently who was trying to come back and sell equipment, and Firestone, which is one of the big leading finance companies, is basically their parent bank has said, we're not going to lend at this point anymore until we see what happens. And so liquidity looks like in the industry has just, the government pumped a little bit in for employees, but once that stops, and this is the thing, I've been, entrepreneur my whole life, and it's cheaper to shut your business down than it is to operate it at 70% or 50% capacity.
Right.
And so I don't think we've even scratched the surface on the closures. Like it's probably, how long do you think it's going to take before that starts washing out?
Well, the Congressional Budget Office just came out with an estimate that in the U.S., it's going to take 10 years to get back to where we were with the economy.
Wow.
So on top of all this virus, we got a recession.
Yeah.
And that's going to impact people's spending.
Now the out of home entertainment industry, the FEC industry specifically,
Right.
has always been seen as recession resistant, right? Why is that? Is that true? Is that just the industry making themselves feel better about themselves?
It's not totally true, because when we followed what happened after the Great Recession of 2007, there was a drop off. Now, what happened is there was a shift of the audience. We shifted more to the higher socioeconomic, and we lost a lot of the middle class and the lower class. So that kind of made up for it. But what we're seeing is we're actually seeing an overall decline, and this is before COVID. We're seeing an overall declining out of home entertainment. It's shifting more to digital.
Yeah, and you've posted a lot about that recently, and you've talked, I think, recently about COVID is accelerating the move to the metaverse.
Right.
What does that mean?
No choice. You had no choice. And what's happened is it's now become part of the routine with a lot of people. And the question is, we're in a new world, and we've permanently changed the consumer. We're not going back to the old normal. And the truth is, any LBE that opens is opening as a startup in a completely changed world.
Yeah.
That's how dramatic this has been.
Yeah, I've spoken to a couple of operators who are looking at changing their fundamental business model because of the capacity utilization, right. They have to operate at a higher capacity over more hours. Typically, it's the 80-20 rule or the 85-25, right? Where 75-25 math, where they run at a really high capacity over a really small number of hours, and what they're trying to do is figure out how do they operate at a higher level. If capacity is lower, they have to stretch that out over more days of the week.
Yeah, we now have a term for that. It's called flattening the curve. And the other side of that is increasing your per capita expenditures at the same time.
So getting each person to spend more, which in a recession, that's got to be hard.
Well, it depends who you're targeting. It depends what you're offering. And what we're seeing is, and I think you have a graph we'll eventually put up, but what we're seeing is people now, to get them out of the home, you got to go high fidelity. You got to be over the top. People who can afford it are looking for the premium experience, and they're willing to pay for it.
So you call that the fidelity belly.
Well, yeah, the fidelity.
You call the gap the fidelity belly. Let's talk about that, because it's something I've said we have to deliver awe or orgasms, I've called it. But this amazing experience, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So talk about the fidelity belly. What is it?
What happens is, as technology gets better at home to offer you social experiences, to offer you entertainment experiences, for the out of home, it's got to get more awesome, as you might say. It's got to get better to get people away. And if you just think about the movie theaters, originally we had movie theaters where you hoped the person sitting in front of you wasn't too tall so you could see the screen. And all of a sudden we started getting better video in the home and big screen televisions and Netflix and all that. So what happened is the old theaters fell into what we call the fidelity belly. They didn't have the oomph to get people motivated. So the movie theaters had to reinvent themselves, and they put in the stadium seating. And that worked for a while. And then things kept getting better in the home and the movies and so forth. So then they had to switch. They realized they were competing with the lounge chair in the home. So they had to get their fidelity higher, and they went to the electric lounge chairs, and they went to food, delivering food and booze and so forth in the theater. And that's a good example of how, as the technology gets better, to get people out of the home, you got to get better with that experience.
Yeah. And now you work with FECs, on selection, product mix. You're seeing what people are doing. One of the questions coming in via Twitch is, what's the definition of awesome for an FEC? And there's an interesting question after that is, do we need Bandai and Konami to come up with more extreme games? Is it food, which you've talked a lot about? Like, what represents awesome now in out-of-home entertainment?
Well, you got to have incredible food and beverage now.
That's table
And
stakes, right?
some of the most successful newer concepts pre-COVID, the food and beverage was the majority of their sales. It was actually the anchor. You got to offer an incredible social experience. So that means social games. I mean, that's been part of the rebirth of some bowling and all these different social games. So that's what gets people, we're hardwired as humans to be social. That's how we survived as a social species. That's hardwired in us. And the more you can satisfy that need, the better off you're going to be. Now, there's always exceptions. There's the extreme stuff and so forth. That's a small segment. But the greater, what you call the FEC and I call the LBE market, is about that.
Yeah. And is that where, so something like axe throwing you've mentioned, which has become a bit of a fad or trend, time will tell. Why has that become popular?
It's a little different, but it has a certain rhythm. If you think about those activities that stood the test of time, bowling, billiards, pool, miniature golf,
Top golf now.
Darts and so forth. It's a game where a group of people play. One person throws or rolls something while the others stand around and watch and talk about it.
Yeah.
And axe throwing fell into that same kind of formula. So I think, and it's kind of approachable, it's a little goofy, but I think it's going to stay around some. Now, the question is, it's like a lot of things, been there, done it. Before COVID, we had so many options. We had the food festivals and we had music concerts. We had so much competition. A lot of these FECs were losing their repeat business. Now, fortunately, for a while, we're not going to have those food festivals. We're not going to have those concerts. So in a sense, we're going to have less competition.
Yeah. Yeah. So a follow-up question about, games and parties now. So really the question's about, for FECs where birthday parties were somewhere between 30, 50% of their business in some cases, right? Or group sales and group parties. Right. What do you see emerging for that business? Because without that, none of these places would have been feasible.
And that's going to be a real challenge because you have this whole social distancing. And the problem is right now, if we're opening an LBE under all these standards and regulations and social distancing, the experience isn't as good as it used to be. The experience is actually gone down.
It's diluted.
Yeah, I mean, it's you can't see people smile when they're wearing masks. So we've lost, in essence, a lot of the hospitality aspect and the social aspect of these things. And that's going to be a real struggle. It's not going to be until we get a vaccine. I really don't think we're going to see that recovering until we get a vaccine.
Yeah,
you might get small groups. We have these kind of social bubble concepts. I don't know if you heard about that, where certain friends, they all just stick together and they don't go with, you probably have some groups of 10 and that types of groups. But if you think about most birthday party rooms, they're not big enough to social distance.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, and we'll use that as a segue into some of the operational changes that are going to happen. Because, it just dawned on me that if you have the social bubble, you have to be, the operations people have to identify that those people are together. How are they going to do that? There's going to need to be some visual cue that if I grow in with a group of people that came together, that are in the same social bubble, that we should be able to stay together, and I don't have some 17-year-old constantly telling me to keep my distance.
Well, maybe we're going to have coded masks now. We're seeing all the fashionable masks. Yeah. So maybe when that group comes, they all get a certain mask with some identification on it.
Wow. What are some of the other, I know you...
it has a big smile on it.
Michael Getland should be making those, right? Like the big smiley masks, Mike.
Yes,
Get to work. What are some of the other operational? I know you wrote a whole article about some of the operational changes that people are going to have to make not only to operations, but to the physical infrastructure of the
Yeah.
facility? What are the top ones that you've been talking about?
Well, you have this whole social distancing. So if you look at most restrooms, the urinals are too close together. We need to put barriers between things. You have all the table spacing now, where when you space the tables out to what they are required to be, you usually cut down to about half the capacity. You have all the disinfection going on. And I forget who I read about, but somebody said cleaning and sanitizing needs to now be part of the show, because you got to reassure people that you're going to a safe venue. You have checking the people's temperature when they come in. Then the whole issue we were talking about with the masks. How do you enforce people wearing masks so everybody will feel comfortable there?
Yeah. So before we went on the air,
Right.
you gave a statistic about, and I'll frame the question. I talked to Todd Monsell from Synergy Entertainment, who runs some, theater, bowling, FEC centers, massive ones in Texas. And he said one of his biggest concerns is, they want to check temperatures at the door. They want to enforce certain procedures, but, their employees are basically teenagers or young adults, and putting, a teenager at the door telling, some big burly dude with a shotgun in his truck in Texas, his words, not mine, that you have to take his temperature and he might not be allowed in. How do you enforce that? And then you talked about the other side of the equation.
Yeah. The other side of the equation is the majority of the population are worried about going out because other people will act irresponsibly, such as not wearing a mask or not social distancing. So it's a real problem. And if you look at the population in the US, younger than 65, everybody over 65 is considered a high risk of catching COVID-19. But if you look at the population between 25 and 65, 40% of them have underlying medical conditions that also put them at high risk. So they're not going to be going out to anywhere that they don't feel is really safe for them.
Mm. So somebody's asking, what happens if no vaccine is developed, as some experts are saying is possible? Because, viruses are hard. It took us, 35 or 40 years to come up with a treatment for AIDS, and it's not a vaccine. It doesn't cure it. It just allows people to,
Right.
to mitigate the risk of it. And so, what happens if we don't come up with a vaccine? Is the industry just done?
I don't think it's done. I think every old business model is done. But I think some people, we're going to reinvent it somehow. We're going to find ways to make it work. And the bottom line is, eventually, if we don't get a vaccine, and there's a chance we won't get a vaccine, or we might get a vaccine and the damn virus mutates and the vaccine doesn't work anymore, just like the flu. But eventually we will get the herd mentality.
Yeah,
Herd
immunity. Herd immunity, yeah. We have herd mentality now. We're there.
We'll get the herd immunity because eventually, we'll get enough people infected where it becomes a minor risk. But we may just have to learn how to live with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so are you seeing any business models emerge that you're enthusiastic about, or changes that people are talking about that might work?
It's been real interesting. There's been some studies done more in the cultural museum industry. And what's surprising is people are most excited about returning to zoos.
Wow.
Because, well, number one, they're outdoors, which is considered the safest type environment. And number two, they're less interactive. Now, we do a lot of work with agritourism or agritainment, and I think they're going to have a good fall here with the corn mazes and the pumpkin patches, because they're outdoors, they're part of a tradition, and there's nothing that makes you feel more normal than following a tradition in the fall. So I think those venues are probably going to do real well. There may be some things they can't do. They might not be able to do the trampolines. And, we have this whole thing about high touch. And right now the CDC is saying, well, maybe you really can't catch it that much from high touch, but people are still want to see everything disinfected constantly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the airlines now. Every time the plane lands, they go through and spray it with disinfectant.
Yeah, like they're using the same stuff that they used in bowling shoes for all those years, maybe. I'm just.
I don't know. They now need to use that in the 10-pin bowling balls. Think about the holes you put your fingers in.
Yeah, I know, and I've talked to a bunch of operators in the bowling about what they're doing, and they're trying to figure out, like, I think Main Event said they're going to have a bowling concierge
Yeah.
who takes the balls from the back and brings them out and fits them and delivers them, and and I know in your analysis around break even, you had a small incremental increase in labor percent from
Yes.
23 to
All
26 or.
that. Right.
But I think with all of these cleaning and hygiene things, that probably underestimating. You were probably a bit conservative, on that labor percentage growth
Yeah.
because not only is revenue coming down, but they're going to have to throw more people at this problem until there's some
Yeah.
automated solutions.
And the problem is during your peak times when you want to have the maximum throughput, you got to stop. Whether you're laser tag or something else, you got to take a pause
Yeah.
to disinfect.
Yeah. What about laser tag? So I think it was, I don't know if it was Main Event or who said, I read somewhere they're going to be coming out with a new laser tag game model where you have to, there's social distancing within the arena and they're going to have different zones on the floor and a player has to go to that zone and then they rotate zones.
Yeah.
I was in the laser tag business in the late 80s and early 90s and didn't see gameplay evolve that much over a 30-year period. Is laser tag maybe just going to fall prey to this?
I think they'll probably figure it out. Maybe they'll build distance warnings into the system, and if you get closer than 6 foot to somebody, you lose points. I'm sure they'll come up with ways to deal with it. And the real question is, how are they going to disinfect all the equipment?
Yeah.
I'm hearing about UL lights and different systems. And, humans are pretty ingenious. We'll probably figure it out.
Yeah. And so the question isn't, so if we're going to figure it out, it's a function of time. And I think, as you've said, there's a couple of timelines. There's a timeline of people coming back and doing things they used to do. There's potential timeline around immunity or vaccines. And then there's timeline to experiment and with new business models. And then there's
we got timeline of economics and recession too.
And of how much working capital do these places have to survive. So we've got 5 timelines at least that are going to have to converge in some way, shape, or form. And I think you've predicted that there was too much. One of your big things going into COVID was there's too much competition in location-based entertainment, especially in the FEC business.
Areas, yeah, a lot of major cities in the U.S. It just got crazy.
And so, is this going to wash that out, and we'll have fewer locations that the ones that survive are going to be more healthy?
Hopefully, that's going to be to their advantage. The issue, though, becomes, certain people are avid bowlers and certain people are avid laser taggers. So it doesn't necessarily mean if all the laser tag facilities don't make it in some city, they're going to shift to some other activity. Remember, we have to eat 3, 4, 5 times a day now. We don't have to go out for entertainment.
Yeah.
We don't have to go out. We can just sit home. We can have cocktail hour with our friends on Zoom. So
yeah.
To reinvent it, it's got to be really super.
And so somebody actually posted. Somebody's posting some really good questions around big IP, and so I think Charlie Keegan, who's the former CEO of Main Event, is doing something with Hasbro around designing a new FEC that was announced, and there's big IP properties like Fisher Price. Is that part of this getting out of the fidelity belly? Does IP play a role in that?
I think it could be more in your tourist regional type attractions, but I don't think in your local community where you're going after repeat appeal. Remember, themes can get old. Remember the themed restaurants?
Yeah.
They didn't last.
Rainforest so Cafe and
yeah. You got to be careful with theming. You really have to be. It's about the experience. It's not about the theme.
Yeah, interesting. And so from a repeatability standpoint, I know you've got research on this one. So I talk to a lot of owners of especially VR arcades. Most of those guys are new to the industry, right? So they're enthusiasts about virtual reality. They opened a VR arcade. They don't have a lot of background in the location-based entertainment industry, and there was an expectation that people would come back like once a month or multiple times a month. And the statistics around repeat visitation in local entertainment centers is actually surprisingly low. What do you have there?
It's overall it's 2 to 2.5 times a year.
Yeah.
It's and they all work when they first open because everybody shows up to check them out. And quite honestly, I think that the VR venues are really the Trojan horse for VR because what they're doing is they're introducing everybody to it. In a year or two, we're going to have much more advanced VR technology at home, and we're going to have 5G so we can get it from our cell phones and other things. So I think they have the same issue with the Fidelity Belly.
Yeah.
Right now, they're out there all alone, but suddenly technology is going to become more convenient with VR in the home, and maybe it won't be quite as good, but it'll be good enough to keep people home.
Yeah.
Because I can go into some virtual environment and play with my friend over who's in China.
And the challenge right now is, and we've been going through this, I'm testing, 50 or 100 different remote collaboration and event platforms, and
right.
Getting them working. Kylie's been ready to pull her hair out because just making them work is hard. Like the onboarding
right.
process, the technology is just not, the user experience isn't there yet. They're going to figure that out. And what's going to happen, much like what happened with smartphones, is, everybody got a BlackBerry for work. And that taught people that they could have the internet away from their desk. And then from
right.
there, they said, well, why can't I have a web browser? And then Apple came out with an iPhone, and everybody's like, and the race was on. And so what's going to happen is, because of remote work, companies are going to be deploying VR technology over the next several years for remote workers to do collaboration. And that's going to drive the awareness of VR. And then they're going to be either use that technology or buy their own technology to be able to play these games. And over the next few years, hard to say how soon, I think more people will have VR in the home because of remote work, because people aren't going back to work.
Well, it's just like what's happening with Zoom. Who ever heard of Zoom before the pandemic? And
just now tech companies.
Now people who you would never think would embrace that technology are having cocktail parties with their friends over Zoom. There's princess parties for 4 years old. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Because we had no choice, so it just accelerated where it was going. And what you're talking about with people working at home is just going to accelerate the adoption and probably the technology, because there's going to be demand for it. So people are going to pump more money into developing it.
Yeah. Somebody's asking a question about Chuck E. Cheese, going back to the theming, and I think this is a really interesting point and worth backtracking on. Isn't Chuck E., because we talked about themes, and themes can become dated, and Chuck E. Cheese is a theme, and it's been around since my kids were kids, and even before then. My answer to that is, there's IP, and they created their own IP with a theme, and then there's licensed IP, and those are different because licensed IP can come and go in the zeitgeist of the consumer. But how do you see? Let's go back to Chuck E. Cheese for a bit. It's been around. It's gone through peaks and valleys and ups and
right.
downs, and they've had their struggles and successes. And how do you view Chuck E. Cheese as an example of a company that's been around for a long time? It's had to reinvent itself multiple times, but in what seems like really subtle ways.
Well, they've recently redesigned their facilities, and they kind of de-themed them a little, because what we've seen is a major shift in parenting with millennials. When I grew up, my parents would do something just for me because I wanted to do it. Well, millennials take a whole different attitude. Their attitude is, if it doesn't work for me, I'm not interested in taking my kid to it either. So Chuck E. Cheese realized that the parent had the veto factor, and they've come out with a new model. They're working at trying to improve their food, for the mom especially.
Yep.
So and they are part of tradition. If you've been around long enough, it kind of becomes, well, I was a kid and I went to Chuck E. Cheese, I'm going to take my kid there. But they are reinventing themselves. They now have where you pay by the hour to play the games, where the kid isn't coming up to you every minute asking for more money, and they're working at it. What they're fighting is the drop in the birth rate.
Yeah.
And it looks like it's going to be even more severe this year.
Well, I don't know. They're talking about all the coronavirus babies though from lockdown, so maybe we'll see a new boom, a baby boom in the next few years.
Yeah, well, we'll know in about a year if that really happened or not.
So somebody else has asked about sports betting and real money gaming, and we can talk about Vegas a little bit too, maybe in this, which the Vegas market just literally talk about an economy that was totally shut down. And they've been looking at, skill-based gaming and how to reinvent the casino. And so there's a great opportunity now for Vegas to reinvent itself again, because some people in Vegas are saying nightclubs are done, which was a big part of why millennials were going to Vegas, was the mega clubs. What do you see happening with Vegas, with nightclubs, and with gambling?
Well, I'm certainly no expert on it, but I know, Las Vegas has been trying to reinvent themselves, and they're really as much a shopping and dining destination now as they are for gambling. So you just have to shift with the times, and you have to shift with what people's interests are.
Yeah, yeah.
And they are competing with all the online betting.
What about are you watching esports at all?
No.
Yeah. So I'm wondering what's going to happen, because we're seeing one of the things we saw, and it was funny. I was here in Melbourne. They can't. One of the first sporting events they canceled was the Melbourne Grand Prix, and the drivers all decided to race in virtual simulators. And now we're seeing with sports shutdown, we were seeing more and more and more crossover between mainstream athletes going into esports and driving the awareness. And the video game market in general has just exploded during COVID because people are locked down at home. And I think that feeds into your Fidelity Belly expansion, right?
Yes.
So when you think about that in arcades, I mean, this kind of gets back to a question about arcades in general. Like what I'm feeling, and I feel like I'm summarizing this in a way, gaming at home's gotten really good. More people are exposed to how good it is. They're concerned about touching surfaces. Fewer games in the arcade because of social distancing. We can't see each other smile. Like it feels like a massive headwind, which is, I guess, what you've been saying for arcades.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And before COVID, I was writing about, and even Dave & Buster's has acknowledged this, that they have to shift more into social games into arcades rather than just solo games.
Yeah. Yeah, we went to a place here in Melbourne, looking at Kylie, my producer. And there was a game from, I think it was Konami, and it was a Japanese game, and it was a series of mini games. It was a little 4-person, I can't remember the name of it, but you were on a journey to get Instagram followers, and it was a bunch of little mini game button smashing games, and it was like the most popular game in there. It was one of their top earning games because you'd sit there with a drink, you could play while you were drinking. There was a cycle, as you've described, where you would choose when to start the next game. You'd play for 30 seconds max. Then you'd talk about it, you'd joke about it, you'd laugh about who won, you'd have a drink, and then you'd start the next one. And so are you seeing more of those games in development? Do we need to rush those things to market?
I think we do. I really think we do. It's the social experience. The high fidelity social experience is going to get people out of the home. Yeah. And, we just have a hard time socializing sitting next to each other. We have to be doing something that helps facilitate that.
Yeah.
We around the campfire. Think about it. We all would sit around a campfire and tell stories and eat and drink and chew on some weird animal bone or wherever it was. But that's how we were wired.
We still do that.
Yeah.
Chewing on the animal bone.
I think we call them chicken wings now.
Chicken wings, yeah. Yeah, there's a $1 billion chain built around that. So so it's the innate human need of which
Yes.
goes because I think people hear social experience in the industry and they translate that to rationalize the experience that they're providing rather than thinking about what it really means to the consumer.
Right.
And this is one of the things that I was always railed against in the early VR arcades, where they built these booths and they had everybody go into a 10-foot booth by themselves and play a game, which wasn't innately social. Now, the irony is those businesses have social distancing built into them. And those might be the safest things to go and take your family to do. And while people don't have VR, my advice to all of the people operating VR arcades is just promote your hygiene theater, and let people know that you've got social distancing and walls built in. And it's probably the safest thing you can take your kids to do right now. I don't know how long that's going to last.
Well, actually, probably miniature golf is the safest thing because you get a group of 4 people and they're distanced from the next hole.
Yeah.
Miniature golf's probably going to make a comeback. It's evolved now into more an adult drinking activity. We're seeing this in London, and they're bringing some venues to Chicago, and we've seen some venues in Florida. They're outdoors where they deliver the drink to you and all. But yeah, that has built-in social distancing.
Yeah.
And it has that rhythm. It has that one person whacks the ball.
Everybody else talks
and socializes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not about the entertainment. And so much of the industry doesn't get this. It's not about the attraction. It's about the total experience. And if you drill down and look at why people go out, it's for the social. And we've seen that people go to museums because of the social experience.
So why are arcades, Randy? Why are arcades, which are such a big part of the footprint and the investment of a family entertainment center, still such a big part of the footprint and investment of a family entertainment center when arcade games are not inherently social?
Because everybody just copies everybody in this industry, and you only rarely get some innovation. And now all of a sudden, we're going to get innovation.
Yeah.
Because the old formulas don't work. Every business model is now obsolete.
Yeah. So this goes back to a question from early on in the chat. Somebody asked, is this the best time for someone new to the industry to break into the industry versus the endemics who've been around for a long time who are wedded to the models? I have my answer. I want to hear yours.
Well, I'll say this. Some of the best concepts we've seen in the last few years were developed by restaurateurs, not by people in the entertainment industry. Now, talking about the present time, I'd want to sit around and wait about a year to see where I'm going to take something. I don't think you can launch now because we don't quite know what that formula is. And it's kind of evolving every day for a while.
Yeah.
So I think we got to wait and see how it all pans out. But it'll be a great opportunity for somebody not in the industry to take a look at it, see the forest through the trees, and maybe come up with a new approach where the economics will work. And food and beverage is probably going to be a key part of it.
Yeah.
It almost has to be.
Yeah. Now George Terralis is posting, not us. People don't seem to be care. The restrictions are lifted and people are flooding out. I want to warn everybody. Be really careful of what you believe from the media. And now I'm not going to go on my media rant now, but what I am going to say is what they're doing is they're highlighting the places where people are rushing in and being crowded. All right. Now I went to a park recently where everybody was social distancing and I didn't see a camera in sight. But that day there were people looking at the mall, and it was around Mother's Day and there was a crowd at the mall. So that's what they were showing. But you need everybody to come back out. If 50% of the people ignore the warnings and come back, the media will be able to show shots of people crowded, but that's not enough to provide a sustainable business for an industry. So please be careful about taking what you see in the media and assuming that that means everybody doesn't care, because the stats show different.
And you're absolutely right. And what we're seeing is this surge of that smaller percentage of people who are willing to go out, all showing up at once. It's going to flatten out. It's going to decline.
And the media is going to turn their attention away from it too, because they've got other things to focus on.
Yeah.
And then, And then I have to bring it up. I have to bring it up. The between the rush back and then now all the protests, it's almost inevitable that we're going to see another spike come the fall, maybe before the fall. And so your advice to sit and wait is absolutely critical, I think.
We're going to see a spike in 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah. It feels inevitable, doesn't it?
Yeah. I think everybody, when they say open up, a lot of people just, it's fine. It's gone. They just were, stir crazy from being home for 2 months.
Yeah.
And they kind of didn't realize that virus is still everywhere.
I spoke to an operator who has 1,000 employees across a number of different brands. And, and he had to stand them all down, and the government was providing, ways to keep them paid. But in essence, they weren't working because the locations were shut. And one of his managers, senior but middle management, came to him and said that people are all expecting it to go back to normal soon. And he was really surprised by that, and I was a bit too, that most people believe that it's going to go back to normal. And I spoke to a friend of mine who I consider really intelligent and really evolved. And I told him 2 months ago, I said, dude, you need to think about shifting your skill set into another market besides location-based entertainment equipment sales. Right. And he said, I'm not ready to think about that yet. Like, he just didn't want to admit it to himself.
It's never going to go back to the old normal.
Yeah.
It's over. It's history.
Yeah.
Just like the stadium seat movie theaters became obsolete.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're not sure what the new normal is going to be. And the normal is going to evolve. The normal is going to be changing for a while. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Let's talk about movie theaters real quick, because you just hit on that again, and this notion of where they're delivering. I guess we're going to see in the next couple of weeks Christopher Tenet, the movie, the director of The Dark Knight,
right?
Christopher something. Sorry, can't remember his name. Is coming out with Christopher Nolan. Yeah, is coming out with the first potential blockbuster of the summer, is supposed to launch in July. Are you seeing movie theaters open yet? And are there going to be enough theater screens for them to not release that simultaneously to the home?
I don't know. Here is varying by city and state and so forth, but a lot of them are still locked down. And I don't think you're going to see enough people showing up. You're going to have people showing up. Yeah. There's a certain percentage, especially the younger they are, the more prone they are, the surveys show, to show up. But you're never going to get, what it would have been in 2019.
Yeah. And if you've got a potential, and if you've got a potential movie that could do several hundred million or $500 million in revenue, and only 20% of the theater seats are open, and I'm wondering if they're going to rush to open because of this movie. Like, is there a push-pull maybe within the theater industry where they're going to, this movie coming out is going to get them all to rush to try to pick up the nickels and dimes laying in the street, because the theater companies, especially like AMC, which is another debt-riddled company that just raised another $500 million in debt to survive. How do they come out of this?
Well, and one of the problems is, I think it was Paramount, the studio, who says, we're going to release films at home, streaming.
Universal and Warner Brothers then also followed. Paramount's been quiet so far.
Okay, but so that's even a bigger threat to them.
Yeah. Yeah, because what they're doing is extending the fidelity belly even further, because now you get first-run movies in your home.
Yeah, on my 78-inch, whatever it is, super-duper TV with surround sound, and I can stop it to go to the bathroom or go get my beer.
Yeah. Yeah, crazy times. It's too early here to drink. But I will say, I've got a lot of friends. Almost all of my friends are in this industry, and they're all being affected, as I'm sure yours are too. And what's the what's the feeling? What's the mindset of the operators? Like, what are you getting when you're talking to them? Are they optimistic? Are they like, where are they?
They're all trying to be optimistic, but I think they're scared as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, because nobody knows, at what speed and where this is going. And so there's no certainty. And that's what people love in their lives. They want certainty, they want prediction.
Yeah.
And we're in a very dark time right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for continuing to educate and inform us all, because I think it's critical that we see the data, because there's so much bullshit out there and so much rumor and innuendo, and you're continuing to bring us facts that people like me get to try to turn into insights and predictions. And without you, I wouldn't be able to do what I do. And I can't thank you enough.
Well, thank you, Bob. Yeah, we try to be evidence-based wherever we can.
Yeah.
And I hope things get better faster than what the evidence is showing, but it's the best data we have now.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, something I've said and other people is people do have short memories.
Yes.
And I remember that after 9/11, and I know statistically it took 7 years for the airline industry to get back to capacity, but it felt like it happened as a consumer. It felt like it happened a lot faster than that. And this is, for an operator, this is the thing you have to understand is you need the crowds. You need the whole market to come back, unless you invent a model that can survive on half the market or 70% of the market. And that's what you got to be thinking about.
Yeah, but what's different than 9/11 is people weren't worried about airplanes crashing into their homes back then. Now we're worried anywhere we go, we could catch something and die.
I remember being afraid. I remember people were afraid of malls. Like there was rumor that, whatever they were called at the time before ISIS was gonna, they were gonna blow up shopping malls, and people were and for a while, every time a plane went up, everybody would like stop and look up and wonder. And so, there was a lot of fear in the zeitgeist after that happened, and with security theater and stuff like that, it happened. Trixie LaRue just said in Texas this weekend, everywhere they went was packed.
Mm-hmm. And people probably weren't social distancing, and they probably weren't wearing masks.
Yep. And that becomes the challenge as people see that. Does half the market pull back? Oh, let's talk about the political divide, because we didn't get to that one. And this is key to this, and especially Texas is one of those examples, right? Where there's a political divide between the red states and the blue states as who's willing to do what. And it's
the red people
massive.
And the blue people. It's the red people and the blue people, the Republicans and the Democrats. It's showing up across every survey we see. And the best I can explain is half the world is wired one way and the other half of the world is wired another way.
And there's no empathy between the two.
Not too much. No, not too much.
Yeah. And I think this is the thing, is that as the people, as the red people, as you've called them, go out without the masks, the blue people are going to see that. And they're going to pull back, and that gets us this natural cap on market demand that isn't enough to get us back to where we needed to be at 70, 80, 90% to generate a profit.
Yeah. The bottom line is, hopefully, the scientists are going to save us.
Yeah, you can't wait for that, though. Look, but we can't, as a business owner, you can't wait for that. So what you need to do, the takeaway from this is, you need to invent a business model where you can be profitable at no more than 70% of your previous business.
Or whatever the percent is, however you work the model.
So when you took one last question, because I know you get involved in this. When you say capacity, this came up recently from somebody. The 50% capacity that I'm hearing in certain states is based on fire marshal capacity, which isn't necessarily true capacity for a location. So what does that mean?
Many times the fire marshal capacity is way higher than what they normally operate. So that's an advantage. Maybe they're at 70%.
Yeah.
Or theoretically, if the people show up.
Because the little number over the door where they make you put it might say 1,000 people, but realistically, you've never had more than 500. So 50% of that capacity could be 100% of actual capacity, right?
Right. But then you need enough people to make that happen.
That's the other side of it. Yep.
That's the other side of it.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Randy, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us today and share the data and keep it coming. Follow Randy White Hutchinson on Twitter, on LinkedIn. Go to whitehutchinson.com, sign up /blog, sign up for the blog. It's gold. Yeah, I don't know what else to say, but
Bob, thank you so much. It's been great talking to you on the other side of the world, and we share our experiences here, and maybe we'll get together in 6 months and see how it's progressed.
At some point, we'll definitely connect, and hopefully maybe even in person. Oh, just one last thing. I'll pull a Columbo. IAAPA announced yesterday that the IAAPA Orlando show is on. What do you think of that?
I think they may have a problem. Because we don't know what November is going to be like.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the industry is not going to show up.
Now, they were looking at splitting that amongst 2 halls. They're probably going to be able to consolidate that. I would imagine the show will be half the size of what it was going to be at best. And they also said that in 2 weeks, they're going to announce what happens with London, which is in September, which I can't see that happening. I can't see international travel in September. But Orlando is opening. The theme parks are opening, right? I mean, it feels like Orlando is got such an investment in reopening. I'm wondering if they're not going to try to pull it off.
They're probably going to try, but you got the hesitation on getting on airplanes, and a large part of our industry is at risk.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and a lot of that industry, that show is international, and international travel is still risky because you don't know, you have to come back, you're into quarantine, like who knows what the hell is going to happen. International travel feels like it's going to be slow to come back. So it might wind up becoming a domestic show, if anything.
Yes, probably will.
Yeah. Well, we'll be continuing to talk about IAAPA. Like you said, I think this is a time where if you're coming out of this, you have to relaunch your business. Whether you're a supplier, whether you're an operator, no matter where you play, this is a time where if you're going to come out of it, you have to think about launching again. And what does that mean?
Yeah, you're really a startup.
You're a startup again. And so, so let's keep that conversation going. Send me emails, vrbob@bobcooney.com. If you're not part of the Facebook mentoring group, make sure you check that out. It's on the bottom of all my emails. It's on my website. And let's keep that conversation going, because I think as the industry awakens and tries to relaunch, there's a different way of doing things and different conversations need to happen. So awesome. Randy, I thank you. Everybody check out. Don't forget, last year we did a whole bunch of deep dives. This one will go in that as well. The videos are all on beingvirtual.tv. We've also converted most of them to audio podcasts. And so if you just go to iTunes, Spotify, or anywhere you get podcasts, search for Bob Cooney Deep Dive. They will pop up. And we are still on temporary hiatus at the Being Virtual show, so we don't have another show to announce yet, but we sure will come back to you soon with somebody interesting. And I want you all to stay safe, stay sane, love one another, and stay in touch. Thanks, Randy.
Thanks. Bye.
We'll see you soon. Bye, everyone.